KPFK Los Angeles.
Oh, about half past the hour, unless you're listening on a podcast, in which case it is still half past the hour. Cary Harrison with you, your new best friend. You can go and get our free newsletter at caryharrison.com, caryharrison.com. Sending out a bunch already. If you haven't gotten yours yet, it is on the way. It contains some videos, things we simply cannot get away with on the radio. Not just FCC regulations, but just getting shot in the parking lot kind of thing. Plus commentaries, evidence of this and that, cool stories, a little bit of conspiratorium, all the whole soup, cat, and pizzas, all the good, clean fun. So that's my free, what am I trying to say? Free email? Well, it's already free. No, it's not. I pay for a special email address. Free newsletter by going to caryharrison.com. You can also follow me across all social media at Go Harrison or at Cary Harrison. We're talking right now to Professor Pat Willerton, Professor of Political Science in the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona. He focuses on Russia. You can see his TED Talk simply by looking up The Russian Soul, going back to 2013. It is a seminal talk on Russia. He lived in the Soviet Union at one time, and he has studied it extensively. So this brings us forward to right now, today. Russia has invaded Ukraine. There's a lot of dead people. There's a lot of destruction here and there. People aren't sure, is Vladimir Putin fighting the Nazis that never went away after World War II? Yes, they've secretly been living there for 80 years, Goebbels, Goering, whoever they are. And so Putin has decided it's time to end World War II. At least this is what we sort of think here in the States, because it's not really explained. But there really were, or should we say are, remnants of some sort of neo-Nazi footprint in Ukraine. Pat Willerton, Professor Pat Willerton, help us understand what that actually means for like Mildred sitting there in her house dress with a melted Domino's pizza across her lap and a crushed can of Budweiser in her left hand.
Well, there are a number of factors that underlie Russia going into Ukraine. And I would start in another place, but I'm happy to talk about Right Sector, Azov Battalion. These are clearly fascist neo-Nazi groups. They're the sort of guiding light, Stepan Bandera, who lived from 1909 to 1959. I don't know that he joined the Nazi Party, but I don't think it's unfair to see him as a neo-Nazi. We could get into that aspect of it, but I think fundamentally the reason that Russia went in is for the reason that they have indicated for 30 years. And that was they would never permit Ukraine to join NATO. It's as simple as that, never. And they were never going to allow NATO bases to be on their border there. They are never going to allow American troops and the possibility of American nuclear weapons. And so I simply, that's where I mostly focus. Of course, there are various factors. We could talk about the complexity of Ukraine, that eastern and southern Ukraine, about half of the country is pro-Russian, and western and central Ukraine, about half the country are pro-Western. That when you look at all the elections from 1992 to 2014, they were about 50-50. And just as we in the United States have red and blue America, Ukraine has blue and yellow Ukraine, the colors of their flag. And I can look at the regions and how they vote, and it's like the United States. Every election, we see that region going yellow or blue, just like in our country. We know that Rhode Island will vote for the Democrats and that Louisiana will vote for the Republicans. So the country was split 50-50 going into the events of 2014. But to me, if we want to just start, I don't think that the primary reason that the Russians went in has to do with these neo-Nazi, these fascist groups that frankly are influential. I think the reason they went in is because of NATO expansion. And you brought up the famous comment that Secretary of State James Baker made to the Russian leadership around 1990-91. He said, NATO expansion, not 1 inch eastward. Well, we know what happened. But for the Russians, they have a very special feeling about Ukraine. This is the font of their civilization. Kiev is called the mother of Russian cities. This is the phrase they use. Kiev is sacred to Russians. We Americans, we don't have a country like that. You know, we threw the British out of here. We speak English and we like the royal family, but that's after we threw them out. So the truth is we don't have a place like that. So to be honest with you, I know we like to focus on Putin, that he's demonic and he's obsessed and maybe he's mentally ill. But frankly, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, Medvedev, they all said this. And I believe no Russian leader would have tolerated Ukraine joining NATO. So this to me is the fundamental issue. Finally, I see this very akin to President Kennedy in 1962 saying to the Soviets, we will not tolerate your missiles in Cuba. And we affirmed the Monroe Doctrine. And incidentally, John Bolton, President Trump's national security advisor, as recently as a couple of years ago, said, we still believe in the Monroe Doctrine. We assert the right to keep foreign powers out of the Americas. And we have for 200 years. So this is how I look at it. I see this as power. This is global power issues.
That is the best analysis I have ever heard, compressed into some beautiful, short, quick, easy, digestible minutes. And I want to thank you, Professor Pat Willerton, for laying that out for us, because you brought up a couple of things we had discussed 1990 when the Secretary of State, James Baker, we hadn't referred to him before, but the idea that NATO would not move 1 inch into Ukraine. There are also apparently some U.S. bioweapons labs and some other things dotted around there, not to mention running up against the border. And when you make the analogy, which is very interesting, about the Monroe Doctrine and how we reserve the right not to allow any foreign powers in the U.S., which used to include broadcasting, by the way. There was an act once upon a time, all the way up until the late 1980s, that said no foreigner, none, zero, was allowed to own a U.S. radio station. TV was not in mind when this law was put into effect. And that was to keep the Fuhrer from coming on the air here in the U.S., which was Henry Ford's wet dream. Henry Ford, of course, voluptuously and lovingly written about in Mein Kampf. Henry Ford, who published the Dearborn Independent, the anti-Semitic rag. Henry Ford, well, we can go on forever. That's a whole different history lesson, and one of my favorites, by the way. But there is a reason, a real reason, why you didn't let foreigners in, because bad things happen. So if you just flip the tables, as you've pointed out, and see the Russians feel they have the same right not to let the foreigners in, it kind of starts to explain all of this in a way that...
Look, great powers have their spheres of influence. And just, Cary, to be very clear as I set this out with your listeners and anyone that watches this, I'm not advocating for this. I'm not saying that Ukrainians and Cubans shouldn't have rights. I'm simply talking about reality. The reality is great powers are able to exert their interest in their region. And I was talking with a Canadian soon after the 2014 events with Crimea. And I said, look, I lived in Michigan. I lived near Canada. I love Canada. I love Canadians, but I got to be honest with you. Canada has as much national sovereignty and independence as we give you, although we won't say that. That's not a nice thing to say, because you know something? With 90% of Canadians living within 100 miles of our border, we will never allow Canada to join a military, political, or economic bloc which excludes us and is opposed to us. This is just reality. So when you look around the world right now, like with Taiwan, we have to just confront reality. The Chinese consider this a part of their country. We didn't say anything when they went into Tibet, which they considered a part of Greater China. So, you know, we have our feelings about the Americas from Canada down to Argentina, and we've defended them for 200 years. You know, I never heard anybody in 1962 say, wait a minute, what are the rights of the Cubans? You know, we did try to overthrow Castro in 1961. It was the failed Bay of Pigs. Don't they have a sovereign right to defend themselves? I never heard anybody say that. We just said we're not going to allow Soviet missiles on the island, and we asserted ourselves, and we were willing to go to nuclear war over it. And thank God we didn't.
Yeah, thank God we didn't. Professor Pat Willerton with us here on the Cary Harrison Show. You can get our free newsletter at caryharrison.com, which contains a bunch of cool, jaw-dropping stuff, including some potential outtakes from this very conversation, if there are any. So far, we haven't had to take anything out, so it's pretty exciting. Pat Willerton is a professor of political science in the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona, focusing on Russia specifically. TEDx talker, The Russian Soul, has become quite famous. And it's interesting, Pat, you talk about Cuba, and most Americans, they never really actually thought about the fact that Gitmo, famous Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay, is in Cuba. What? Wait a minute. On a U.S. base is actually it's in Cuba. Like, how is that possible? Would we allow the Cubans to have a base in the U.S.? No. Any circumstances? Never. Any at all? No. Never. In fact, would we allow anybody anywhere to ever have a base here in America? No. Period. End of sentence. Yet our military is dotted some 800-plus bases all over Earth. New Zealand, Australia, England, Germany, Japan, you name it, we are there. And it doesn't, I think the public is not aware that there's something special going on when we get to do what we want, but other people cannot. It doesn't mean we love them. It doesn't mean we vote yes for what they're saying, but do they, us being freedom of speech advocates, do they have the right to express their opinions and their speech as well? That's an interesting geopolitical question.
Well, when you look at Ukraine, for instance, I've only been there once. I've only been to, now the Russian pronunciation would be Kiev, Ukrainian Kyiv. I want to be respectful of Ukrainian views, although it's a very divided country. So, for instance, I have a lot of friends that live in eastern Ukraine in the city of Kharkov, which is the second largest. I prefer to pronounce it in the Russian way, Kharkov, because all of my friends are Russian speaking. On the other hand, Lviv, which is in the far west, I prefer to use that pronunciation, the Ukrainian, not Lvov, the Russian. So, the country is very diverse. As I said, their elections were 50-50 for nearly 2 decades. If you ask me, how could we have avoided this? I guess I wish there had been a way for Ukraine and Russia and the United States, various parties, to have worked out security arrangements that perhaps Ukraine would have a status more akin to Austria or to Finland. These countries were able to make arrangements. Finland and Austria are thriving market economies. They're thriving democracies. They have good relations with Russia. They don't represent, in the eyes of the Russians, a threat. And so they don't belong to these, to NATO. I'm sorry this didn't work out. We're past that now, but I'm just saying that. Now, if you ask me, can we look ahead instead of historically? What are we going to do now? We're in a heck of a situation. This is really not a good situation because, frankly, let me be honest with you and the audience. The Russians have had it. They've had it. They don't trust us anymore. They look at the series of treaties. We pulled out of a bunch of treaties, though not 1 inch forward, all of this. They've had it. I don't quite know how we are going to negotiate with them. However, when this started last February, Vladimir Putin was very clear. We want a general security arrangement in Europe. We want to sit down and talk about everything. And that means their security. They feel we've never taken into account their security concerns. We've been very focused on everybody else's. And we look at a map, they're big, the others are little, therefore they're the threat. But their feeling is, but we have our security interests just like you do. You still have feelings, you Americans, about Cuba. You still have an economic, embargo on Cuba. They're a small country, but you still have feelings about them. That's what they want. So if you ask me for some hopeful note, I'm a glass half full guy. I just can't throw in the towel. That's my hope. I don't know what's going to happen with this horrific war. This is just a nightmare. But I hope that we can have something to come up where everyone can put on the table their security interests. But it's very clear. I'm going on long, but one last point. The Russians will not allow NATO in Ukraine. And in that regard, they are achieving their goal. No NATO, no major military presence in Ukraine. They're just destroying the Ukrainian capability. So they are going to achieve their goals one way or the other. Right now, it's through a horrific war.
It can be a Pyrrhic victory, which, as we know through Greek history and certainly the Roman Empire as well, if you can't have it, you just destroy it so nobody can have it. It's kind of a Bill Shakespeare motif. But, I mean, this could very well possibly happen. Also,
well, it's happening now. It's happening now.
Yeah. There was in 2021, the Russians had asked for this very security arrangement that you're talking about. They actually wanted to restore the post-Cold War security arrangement. And apparently Antony Blinken said, no way. No way. We're not even going to have the conversation. And that was not widely reported, in fact, at all on CNN or any of our mainstream media. Therefore, the public does not know that, and this is not because anyone loves the Russians. You got to disclaim it 1,000 times a minute to get away with the simple conversation you and I are having. But they did put out some kind of olive branch to at least attempt a dialogue, and they got a smack in the face. So now they're smacking back.
Well, they feel they were smacked in the face. Yeah. That's exactly what they say.
And so let's take a quick look. Let's look south of the border here. We've already discussed Canada. We vote yes for Canada. Good table manners. There is that joke. How do you get 10 Canadians out of a swimming pool? Ask. They're lovely. Just lovely. We go south of here in Mexico. If you do a quick Google search, you will find the most amount of Russian spies in the world per capita in all of human history are in Mexico right now, along with Chinese spies too. And the long game of a lot of this is for a Russia-dominated South America going all the way down to Antarctica. It's got the world's greatest volume of trees known as the Amazon, water known as the Amazon, natural gas and oil in Venezuela. It's just ripe with everything you could ever want forever and ever. The New World, as the United States was for Great Britain, so is South America, all of Latin America for Russia right now. And we're busy staring at Ukraine. Oh my God, oh my God. And yes, oh my God, the nuclear power plant. That is a big oh my God, in my opinion. And that could be the Pyrrhic victory we're looking at. But south of here, conspicuously missing from the conversation is why and what? And what do you think?
Well, this is interesting. I didn't know about that. I'm learning something from you. I'll have to look into that. I don't really study intelligence issues, but I know that Russia in the Soviet times had, interest in Mexico. Of course, Trotsky went there when there was the falling out with Stalin. There has been a strong pro-left force culturally within Mexico. So I'm not shocked at what you're saying. I'm going to be careful lest I speak out of turn. I don't know, but I would like to point this out. President Obrador chose not to attend the Summit of the Americas that President Biden hosted in your city in LA.
First time ever.
And he did it in part because he was mad that the United States would not allow certain Latin American countries to attend that we're having issues with, like Nicaragua, like Venezuela, of course, Cuba. So he joined Bolivia. I think it was about 5 countries didn't come. I might also add about a week or so later, he came out rather surprisingly and basically said the West is to blame for the conflict in Ukraine, that it was NATO expansion. And I would hasten to add, because Obrador is not unique among Latin American or Southern Hemisphere countries. In the so-called global South, Latin America, Africa, Asia, only Australia and New Zealand are sanctioning Russia. No other countries are. Brazil is none of the BRICS. Brazil, South Africa, China, India. None of these countries are sanctioning Russia. Mexico is not, and I'm sure there's a lot of pressure on. Israel is not. Now, each country is unique, but my point is the world is quite divided. But you're raising a point about Mexico is very interesting. Now, regarding the concern about Russia, I don't know, expanding its empire into the Americas, I don't see it happening. I think they like poking us in the eye. I think, okay, if you're going to mess around in Georgia, you're messing around in Ukraine. Hey, you're messing around right now in Moldova, and even bullying Serbia. We can have a little fun too. So we're going to do naval games with Venezuela. We're going to do this. Yes, they're doing that. I don't see that they have a real ability to project power. Now, look, I know we're running out of time, and I want to turn the tables. I know I'm not supposed to ask you questions. You're the host.
But you're going to anyway.
But I'm going to anyways, unless you cut me off. In that I'm on edge. I want to hear your story that you had a run-in with Russian intelligence. So if you don't mind me being the interviewer of you, all I want to ask you is I hope you're going to share this story before we run out of time.
Well, I was going to avoid it after rethinking it during the break, but I will share. And by the way, what a delicious conversation with you. I mean, I am learning so much, and I don't get to have people reflect back other information other than recycling the same old stuff, which is so empty and shallow around here. So hats off to this radio station, other radio stations, and you, Professor Pat Willerton. I'm not stalling to answer the question. I'm just reintroducing you for the sake of the listener and the viewer on Facebook who's watching us on the KPFK Facebook page, and of course anywhere else it's live streaming the video. We're talking right now to Professor Pat Willerton, Professor of Political Science in the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona, focusing on Russia. You can see his TEDx talk, The Russian Soul. Just search for it. You'll see it come up. It's one of the most popular TEDx talks ever, and it's going to give you the seminal
Well, let me just, I don't want to mislead anybody. My English language original isn't as big of a hit. I got about 175,000 views, which is fine, but there's some that get millions. However, somebody in Russia in 2020 dubbed it. It went into Russia and it went viral, and I have gotten about 4 million views from Russia, and they do appreciate, I respect them. I am very respectful of their culture. It's not a politics lecture. It's about the beauty of their culture. But
I'm a fan of Catherine the Great. I mean, I have a friend who danced professionally for the Moscow Ballet, which is, in the top 3 of Earth. And at that level, and he was raised under the Soviet mantle, at that level, they get to go into the back rooms of the palace where Catherine the Great lived, and her giant sex dungeons with crystal dildi and slings. I mean, and
wait a minute. What's happening to our elevated talk?
I was avoiding. Okay, so let me just get down to what happened. So there was a best-selling author, translated into 38 languages internationally, and a publicist had asked me to create a webinar for this guy. Short version is I did. I was able to turn it into something really cool, something much larger, and he was a central figure. And he was apolitical, but it turns out he was a 25-year former KGB spook who was, talking about geopolitics, still getting intel, and explaining pretty interestingly about what's going on in the world without too much of a personal bent. Russia invades Ukraine. He looks like he's been reactivated. Obrador loots $70 million out of the Mexican treasury, hires this guy away. He leaves with 1 minute's notice, and they're paying him a fortune to create propaganda, and they want to develop him into the next Joe Rogan of Latin America, to suture together all the countries down there because he speaks only 5 languages fluently. And he stole everything from me. All my IP, my intellectual properties, all of my marketing, all the websites that I built over 2 years, every single thing, just ripped it off. 100%. Some big newspaper has it there. So it's me versus the government of Mexico and Russia. And I've been informed by a friend who works at JSOC, that's the Joint Chiefs of Command, and a couple of FBI guys, best not to diddle with him lest you want plutonium in your underpants. So, I just have to let it go. And it is
painful. You should let it go.
Yeah.
I have to say, I started my career studying patronage, political networks in the Soviet times, and my book on the Soviet politics of Brezhnev period through Gorbachev was on this. And I had to make a decision when I continued my career in the new era. Was I going to continue to study those sorts of informal, extra-legal, illegal realities of life? And I made a decision not to, because it moves you into an area that's very dicey, it's very risky. And frankly, I enjoy life. I have a nice family, and I'm not ready to cash in my chips. And I just decided there were other things that I would like to study. Because to be honest with you, you are bringing up, I know we're running out of time, but I think this is really important. Thank you. I feel like I'm the host now. But honestly, I appreciate what you just shared. This is another reality of life, not just for Russia, but for all countries. We have that whole reality, that Byzantine reality of intelligence gathering and maybe economic, financial corruption. All of this is going on behind the scenes. And I have to say, as an observer, I've been studying Russia for over 50 years. I'll admit I wasn't that serious when I was 10, but I cared. I'm in my late 60s now. But to be honest with you, there is a whole subterranean world. And I chose not to go into it. And I generally don't cherry pick out of it to make an argument like, hey, Cary, I'm going to make this point and I can't prove it because it's classified. But you're just going to have to believe me. So I work with things that are open. Okay, I don't know about that world. I know it goes on, but I think you have to be very careful. So I agree with your friends and colleagues who said to you, leave it alone. I would leave it alone.
You're the 700th person to tell me that. Not one has said do something. So I'm going to go with the crowd, the cool kids in the room, you and others. And I want to thank you specifically for having joined us today. Professor John Pat Willerton, he goes by Pat, because he's cool, groovy, accessible, interesting, funny, companionable, all the good things you want in your professor. And he is a professor of political science in the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona, focusing on Russia. His TEDx talk that we've talked about many times went wildly globally viral when it was dubbed into other languages. And where can we follow you specifically, Professor Willerton?
Well, I'm kind of a dinosaur. I don't really have anything in particular. I publish scholarly articles. I do interviews or do public speaking. I don't really have any place like you have on the internet. But, occasionally things will appear in places. I'm always happy to respond by email. People can just find my email address at the university. I've been here a long time. I'm not planning on going anywhere, so I have a constant email address. And I'll just say in conclusion, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I thank you as a interviewer. I've been doing public talks for 30, 40 years, and I appreciate talking with someone who's both informed and balanced the way that you are. I think your listeners and viewers must enjoy the way that you engage topics. I thought we had a very lively discussion, and I had fun, to be honest with you. And I think when we're having fun, this is serious. Let's be honest about it. A great man has died, and we have a terrible war going on. I don't want to make light of it, but life does go on. And I hope that our interaction was valuable. And I hope that our paths cross again. I've enjoyed talking with you. And as the occasion arises, if you would like to talk to someone regarding Russia, maybe you would set up more than one person. We can have a polemic. That's fine. I'm very happy to talk. But I thank you. I found this very satisfying. And I wish you the best and your listeners and your viewers.
That was like an audio Yelp review, and I'm going to record that and post it.
Okay.
And you will be invited back because you're like a good dinner guest. You kept the table moving. So I will
try. And I'm sure those who watch this did see my rescue dog, Cassie, laying on the couch in the background. And she has behaved very well. And I'm especially happy that my little Scottish Terrier, Mr. Higgins stayed quiet through all this, slept through it, because he's a very determined, bullheaded being. So I'm happy we all were appropriate.
a happy ending, as we say. Cary Harrison with you, thanking
you.
Professor Pat Willerton, Professor of Political Science in the School of Government Public Policy at University of Arizona, focusing on Russia. TEDx talks, having gone viral, made him abundantly famous in ways he never even imagined. Cary Harrison with you. Don't forget, you can get our free newsletter simply by going to CaryHarrison.com, Cary, C-A-R-Y, Harrison.com, and you'll get a lot of cool stuff that we simply cannot do on the radio. I look forward to seeing you next week. And as always, I have nothing pithy to say.